So the lens that we're going to be talking about in today's video is wide, very wide. What you're looking at right now is a 24mm field of view. Now, this is probably considered the entry level, like the beginning of what is considered a wide lens. So if this is a 24mm field of view, let me put on the lens that we're going to be talking about today, and you can just see the difference. So again, 24mm, and now this is the field of view of the lens that we're going to be talking about in today's video. So this is a 9mm field of view on full frame. This is insane. This is the widest lens I've ever used. As you can see, I'm standing the exact same distance away. So 24 to 9mm, just to show you just how wide it is. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. You can see pretty much my entire living room. You can even see the microphone just at the top there that is sort of overhanging because of just how wide this is. So this is a really, really cool lens. And what's even cooler is it's got a 0.2mm focusing distance, close focusing distance. So you can actually get pretty close to it. And that's when things start to get a little bit distorted. So look at this. You can see just how close I'm getting to this lens right now. I'm basically touching the lens, right? Basically touching it. And yet I'm actually, look at this, look at that. See that? Okay, let's talk about this lens. This is the Brightin Star 9mm f5.6. Okay, so before we begin, I just want to thank Brightin Star for sending me this lens for the purpose of this review. I don't have to send it back, but all thoughts expressed are my own, and they see this video when you guys see it. So I was actually thinking initially, do I film this video with like the 24mm lens like I normally do, or do I just film this whole thing with this 9mm? And I think it'll make it a lot more interesting and a little bit more dynamic if we just use this lens the entire video. So just to sort of give you a little bit of a rough idea, I am like maybe 20 centimeters away from the camera right now. This looks absolutely ridiculous. The microphone that's on top of the camera should be able to hear me so bloody loud and clearly. One of the things that I really like about this lens is just how well made it is. So the body and the focus ring and the aperture and everything all made out of completely solid metal. So this lens is extremely, extremely robust and well built. It's also quite small as well. And even though it's got this really big bulbous front element that lets you get real close to the lens and stuff like that, it's got a really nice lens hood on there as well. You got metal front and rear caps. And overall, it's just a really, really nice thing to hold in the hand. Now, typically speaking, a lens this wide would usually be a fisheye lens. So you would have little circular kind of cutouts around the corners, and you'd have to zoom in to get that distorted image. This one it covers the full frame as well, which is really, really impressive because lenses this wide, there's not that many of them out there. The price of this 9mm 5.6 I think makes it fairly competitive as well. So the price of this lens is $439 US, and it's available for Sony E mount, Nikon Z mount, Canon RF mount, and this, which is the L mount as well. So I'm currently filming this on the S5 II. I've used it on the S1R as well, and I think it worked really, really well on the L mount. The other good thing about this lens is its image quality. So at wide open at 5.6, I find that the lens is actually quite sharp. As you stop down to like f8 and above, it gets extremely sharp. It's got quite pleasing sun stars as well, which is really good at those bright apertures. And this lens makes for a really, really good landscape and kind of unique angle lens. But one thing that I really, really enjoyed using this lens for is using it at nightclubs. So using it in the dark, which I know 5.6 seems like it's way too dark to use at a nightclub, but the good thing about the S5 II is that it has actually really good low light performance. So you can really crank that ISO up to like, 12,800, maybe even 25,600 and still get totally usable images that look absolutely fantastic and give you a really cool and unique field of view. Also, if you guys are liking the way that the photos are looking, they're all edited with my new Lightroom presets. So I'll put a link in the description. Definitely be sure to check it out. Every purchase helps support me and this channel. And the other benefit of it being such a dim aperture is the fact that you don't even really need to focus that much. You've got zone markings on the top, but honestly, you can kind of just set it to f8 or f11, and then you kind of just get roughly where you're supposed to be. And because it's so wide, almost everything will be in focus anyway. So it means that I can film this entire video using this lens, and I don't really need to worry about autofocus because obviously this lens doesn't have autofocus, but I don't really need to worry about it. So if you're wondering about the lack of autofocus, is it an issue? Is it not a problem? Personally, I think this lens is fine. like for something this wide, I don't know if you necessarily need autofocus. Although autofocus would have been nice, personally, if I had to pick, I would rather a slightly wider aperture. So who do I think this lens would be really good for? Well, I think if you do real estate photography, this is awesome. If you do astrophotography, it might be a little bit too dim for that. But I think one of the things that I found when using this lens, I've had this lens for about 2 months now. One of the things that I found that I really did not expect is just how much fun it is to have such a wide angle lens. Like, it really does give you a different perspective on the world, and it really lets you get shots that you normally wouldn't be able to get. Really get into very, very tight angles and stuff. Now, I recently watched this really cool YouTube video talking about the lens behind the Wong Kar-wai film Fallen Angels. Now, if you've never heard of that movie, it's a cinematic masterpiece, but that movie was actually filmed with a 9.8mm lens, with an extension sometimes to go to 7.8mm. And the reason that they sort of picked that focal length for something so wide was because they wanted to shoot in really sort of closed in, tight little diners and little noodle shops and stuff like that, and they wanted the audience to feel like they were very, very close to the cast members themselves. So this lens really gives you an opportunity to just make your portraits feel a lot more personal because you're so close to the model themselves, and that's a really interesting sort of like concept. Now, I've personally also used this lens quite a bit. You might have noticed I've done some thumbnails with this lens when I really wanted to get super up close, like for the 51.4 review. And I've actually used it in my S1R review when I wanted to get that really cool, crazy angle of me opening the box. And it's really cool. Like it's such a unique and weird lens, and it's unlike anything I've ever tried before. Another thing that's really impressive with this lens is just how well it handles distortion. So as you can see, straight lines remain actually fairly straight, and that is something that's extremely impressive given the sheer width of this lens. So you have to remember just how wide this is, right? Like when I was using this in the club, shooting this with a flash, I feel like when you use a flash, you kind of avoid a lot of the downsides of having the f5.6 aperture, because you're obviously adding extra light and stuff. So the way I was using it with a flash is just turn on to, ETTL or manual mode or whatever. And I would usually slightly compensate by adding a little bit extra flash power, but you get these really cool flash portraits. The only thing you have to remember as well is you need to be quite careful with how you're shooting, because if you get too close to a subject, the things start to look a little bit distorted, as you can see. But you can also use that to your advantage. And one sort of good tip that I can give you with using this lens is your best friend is going to be shooting everything landscape. If you shoot in portrait, it's going to really stretch out the lines even more, which could be something you might want. I like the exaggerated look, but if you want to keep distortion to an absolute minimum, definitely be shooting this lens in landscape format only. Okay, so what are the negatives? What do I not like about this lens? Well, for starters, the aperture 5.6. I mean, it's doable, it's usable, but it would be a lot nicer if it was a little bit brighter. F4, f2.8 would be amazing. I understand that making a lens this wide for full frame is very, very difficult. There is a reason that there are not that many of these lenses out there. One of the things that you have to remember is that the wider that you go, every millimeter makes a much bigger difference. So while going from like 70 to 80 millimeters is not going to be that significant, going from like 9 to 10 just 9 to 10 is going to be like very, very significant. And that's why I think this lens is very, very well priced for what it is. Only because there's just not that many options out there at the moment for this focal length. And I think that, for the sort of the value provided, I definitely think this is a lens that's definitely worth considering, especially if you're on L mount and you want something this wide. Now, you may be looking at that really bulbous front element and thinking, you can't actually fit any filters to that. And you would be right, you actually can't fit any filters to it. However, Brightin Star has very, very cleverly thought about this, and they actually include 3ND filters in the box, and they actually screw onto the back of the lens, which I think is really nice. They've also got some additional filters available for purchase, and I wouldn't be surprised if we would see like a mist or diffusion filter as well, which would make this lens even better for video shooting. Now, one of the other flaws with this lens is the fact that it doesn't have any electrical contacts. So that means that when you connect this lens onto your camera has absolutely no idea what lens it is. Now, That is fine with Lumix because you can always, if you attach a lens that doesn't have these contacts on it, it will ask you, hey, what lens is this? And you can actually save the lens itself. So I've saved this lens as a 9mm Brightin Star lens, and it'll show up in the EXIF data every time that you shoot it with a Lumix camera. I recently reviewed a Thypox Chimera 28 1.4. And in that review, a lot of people in the comments were really upset that it didn't have electrical contacts, and I 100% agree with you. I think that lens definitely needs electrical contacts, but I think on a lens that is a 1.4 maximum aperture, the contacts are a little bit more important because, you know, you might want to know exactly what kind of aperture you're using. Whereas on this lens here, it's so wide and the aperture is so, you know, so small that most of the stuff you're gonna be shooting will be in focus anyway. Like you're gonna be shooting everything at like f8 and maybe f8 to 11 really. So I don't know, it's not really as necessary. And the field of view is so wide and aggressive that, like, what else do you have that you won't be able to tell photos taken with this lens from others in your album? But that's still not an excuse. I do think that electrical contacts will be amazing. But what I've noticed is that a lot of these manual lens manufacturers just tend to avoid putting them on, maybe to save costs. So in the future, Brightin Star, definitely, if you can add those in, that would be very, very welcomed. And that's about all for today. So what do you guys think about this lens? Do you think it's a little bit too wide, or is it just right for you? Would you give it a go? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And again, thank you so much, Brightin Star, for sending me this lens. I've had so much fun shooting with it, and I'm very, very excited to continue using it. So you'll definitely be seeing it pop up more in my videos. And if you'd like to see more of my videos, definitely be sure to subscribe, because I've got lots more great photography content coming in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys next week.